Viruses. In the last section, we discussed how small a bacteria cell can be, but there is something even smaller, viruses. Viruses cannot reproduce on their own, and in fact, they are not even considered a cell. In order to reproduce, viruses must infect living cells, and scientists have found that there is not a cell which is not vulnerable to infection by the right virus. Now, the structure that viruses have are well suited to its function. What they do is they enter a host cell and they reproduce. While viruses come in a wide variety of sizes and shape, a typical virus is composed of a relatively short piece of nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA, and that is surrounded by a protein coat or a capsid. Now, some viruses, like the one pictured here, can even have a very complex robot-like shape, such as this bacteriophage. A bacteriophage is a virus that infects bacteria. In fact, its name actually means bacteria eater. Now, proteins on the surface of a virus are unique to each one, and they allow viruses to attach to certain cells in the host. Like keys, a virus protein fits only into certain locks, or these proteins on the surface of a host cell. So for example, most cold viruses can only infect cells that are found within the nose and throats of humans. These cells are the ones that have proteins on their surfaces that fit the key of that virus. Now, once a virus attaches to a host cell, it enters that cell, and the virus's genetic material starts to take over the cell's functions. It actually gives instructions to the cell to produce the virus's protein and its genetic material, and then these proteins and genetic material can start assembling new viruses. Now, some viruses will take over a cell immediately and start causing a lytic infection, which means it's going to start copying itself and causing cells to burst, releasing hundreds of viruses immediately. While other viruses will actually sit and hide out for a while, and instead they're going to wait to become active. But while that virus is hiding in a lysogenic, it is going to be replicating its genetic material. Now, during a lytic cycle, the virus is going to inject its genetic material into the cell, and the genetic material takes over the cell functions. The cell will start to produce that virus's proteins and genetic material until they assemble into new viruses that fill the cell. When ready, that cell is going to burst open, releasing new viruses, and those viruses go on and infect more cells. In a lysogenic cycle, the viruses hide for a while, but when the hidden viruses enter the host cells, its genetic material still becomes part of that cell's genetic material. So while the virus does not appear to be affecting the cell's functions, in actuality, each time the cell divides, the virus's genetic material is copied along with the host's genetic material. Then, under the right conditions, the virus's genetic material can suddenly become active and it takes over the cell's function in much the same way that the virus does in the lytic cycle. And soon, the cell is full of new viruses and bursts open. The virus that causes cold sores or warts are actually examples of hidden viruses, and they can remain inactive for months or even years. And while hidden, there are no symptoms, but when active, the viruses show the symptoms of the cold sores or the warts. When DNA is embedded into the host DNA during an infection, this is called a prophage. But sometimes viruses don't embed the usual DNA to RNA flow of genetic information, but instead reverse it and use the RNA as the template to make a double-stranded viral DNA molecule. This is done by what is called a retrovirus. Now, when the viral double-stranded DNA enters a nucleus, it will integrate itself into the host cell DNA, and this viral DNA can remain in the host cell for years. Here's a breakdown of the differences between cells and virus characteristics, including their structure, their reproduction, their genetic code, how they're able to grow and develop and use energy. These are the characteristics that scientists use to determine if something is alive or not. And because viruses do not grow and they cannot obtain their own energy and they have no response to the environment, viruses are considered not living. All right, let's stop here, and it's time to show what you know.